There is a specific sound that water makes when it decides to invade your home at 2 in the morning. It isn't a splash. A splash is playful. A splash implies a pool or a bathtub or a child jumping in a puddle. This wasn't a splash. This was a heavy, rhythmic, sickening thud. It sounded like a wet sock being dropped repeatedly onto a drumhead, and it was coming from the ceiling directly above my head. My eyes snapped open. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:13 a.m. Outside, the world was ending. We live in Texas, and when the sky opens up here, it doesn't just rain, it tries to drown the earth to teach it a lesson. Thunder rattled the window panes in their frames, a low, guttural vibration that I could feel in my molars. But through the cacophony of the storm, I heard it again. Thud, splat, thud. I groaned, rolling over and staring up at the dark void of the ceiling. "Please be a dream," I whispered to the drywall. "Please be a vivid, auditory hallucination brought on by spicy tacos." "Dave?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep beside me. Is that inside?" "I'm investigating," I said, throwing the covers off. I stepped onto the carpet and immediately regretted it. The carpet wasn't soaked, but the air in the room felt heavy, humid, wrong. I flipped the light switch. There it was. A dark, spreading stain on the white popcorn ceiling, right above the foot of the bed. It looked like a Rorschach test for "your savings account is about to die." As I watched, the center of the stain glistened, swelled like a blister, and then released a fat, dirty drop of water onto the duvet cover. "Bucket!" I yelled, abandoning all stealth. "We need buckets! Towels, the pots! Get the pasta pot!" For the next hour, Sarah and I were soldiers in a losing war. We weren't a married couple anymore. We were a bucket brigade. I scrambled into the attic, armed with a flashlight and a sense of impending doom. The attic was a dark, suffocating mouth filled with pink fiberglass insulation and the smell of wet wood. The sound of the rain up here was deafening, a machine gun rattle against the roof decking. I shined the beam upward. It didn't take a structural engineer to find the problem. A massive oak branch, torn loose by the wind, had speared the roof. It hadn't come all the way through, but it had cracked the decking and shattered the shingles, creating a perfect funnel for the deluge outside. Water was pouring in, soaking the insulation, bypassing the joists, and heading straight for my bedroom. "How bad is it?" Sarah yelled from the hatch below. "It's the Titanic up here, minus the violinists," I shouted back. "I'm putting the Tupperware bin under the main flow." I spent the rest of the night curled in the fetal position on a plywood plank in the attic, emptying a plastic bin every 15 minutes, listening to the wind try to peel my house apart. I didn't sleep. I just calculated. Deductible, $2,000. Emergency roofer. Call-out fee, $500. The look on the HOA president's face if I let the lawn die because I'm broke. Priceless, but in a bad way. By 7 o'clock a.m., the rain stopped. The sun came up with that mocking cheerfulness that only follows a disaster. I crawled out of the attic, covered in fiberglass itch and dust, looking like a raccoon that had lost a fight with a cotton candy machine. "Coffee," Sarah said, shoving a mug into my hand. She looked as tired as I felt. "What's the plan?" "The forecast says more rain tonight," I said, staring out the kitchen window at the culprit oak tree. "I can't get a roofer out here today. Every roofer in the county is going to be booked solid. I checked the neighborhood Facebook page. Half the street has damage. So I fix it myself. Temporarily. I have to tarp it. I drove to the hardware store with the urgency of a man transporting a donor organ. The place was a zoo. It seemed every homeowner in Oak Haven Estates had the same idea. I elbowed my way past a guy buying a sump pump and made it to the roofing aisle. It was picked clean. No shingles, no roofing cement. But there, on the bottom shelf, was my salvation. A heavy-duty, reinforced, woven polyethylene tarp. It was blue. Not a subtle navy blue. Not a grayish slate blue that might blend in with the morning sky. This was electric, neon, look-at-me blue. It was the color of a Smurf that had gone nuclear. It was the only one left that was big enough. 20 feet by 30 feet. I grabbed it. I also grabbed 5 boxes of roofing nails and furring strips. The checkout guy, a teenager named Tyler, whose name tag hung upside down, scanned the tarp. "Big storm, huh?" "Huge," I said. "That's a bright tarp," Tyler noted, chewing gum. "You live in the Estates?" "Yeah." "Good luck," Tyler said. He didn't elaborate. He just handed me the receipt with a look of genuine pity. Getting the tarp on the roof was a spectacle. I am not a small man, nor am I particularly graceful. Scaling a 2-story suburban house with a 30-pound roll of plastic on my shoulder is not something I'd put on my dating profile. I slipped twice. At one point, I was straddling the peak of the roof, legs gripping the asphalt shingles like I was riding a mechanical bull, while the wind tried to turn the tarp into a parachute and launch me into the next county. But I did it. I nailed the furring strips down. I secured the edges. I smoothed it out. By noon, the hole was covered. The roof was watertight. I climbed down the ladder, my knees shaking, sweat soaking through my shirt. I stepped back onto the driveway to admire my handiwork. It was hideous. It looked like a giant blue bandage plastered across the forehead of my house. It was visible from space. It was ugly, loud, and garish. But it was dry. "You look like you conquered a mountain," Sarah said, coming out with fresh iced tea. "I feel like a warrior," I said, chugging the tea. "I have defeated the elements. I have protected our castle." And that was when the beige sedan rolled by. It moved slowly, prowling like a shark in shallow water. A Lexus SUV kept in a state of cleanliness that defied the laws of entropy. The window rolled down with a smooth electric hum. Patricia Vance, the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. Patricia was a woman who had weaponized the concept of community standards. She was in her late 50s, with a haircut that cost more than my first car, a sharp, angular bob that looked like it could cut glass. She wore large sunglasses, but I knew she was squinting. She didn't wave. She didn't ask if we were okay after the storm. She didn't offer a neighborly nod. She lifted an iPad. Click. She took a photo of my roof. Then she slowly turned the iPad toward me. Click. She took a photo of me, sweaty, dirty, holding an empty glass of iced tea. "Morning, Patricia," I called out, trying to be civil. "Rough night, huh?" She lowered the iPad. She didn't smile. She just pursed her lips, as if she had tasted something sour. "The blue is very aggressive, David," she said. Her voice was light, airy, and laced with arsenic. "It was the only one they had," I said, walking toward the curb. "Emergency repair. Rain's coming back tonight." "We have standards for a reason," she said, tapping the steering wheel with a manicured fingernail. "Did you consult the approved materials list before purchase?" Patricia, it was 8 o'clock a.m. after a tornado warning. I consulted the Save My Drywall list. She hummed. Well, just be mindful. Bylaws are bylaws. The window rolled up. The Lexus glided away. I hate her, Sarah said from the porch. I genuinely, spiritually hate her. She's just being Patricia, I said, trying to brush it off. She can't do anything. It's an emergency repair. No one fines you for saving your house from water damage. I was so innocent then. So naive. The certified letter arrived 2 days later. I knew what it was before I signed for it. The envelope was thick, heavy stock, cream-colored. The return address was embossed, Oakhaven Estates, HOA, Compliance Division. I sat at the kitchen table and slit it open. Dear homeowner, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Control Committee that an unapproved exterior modification has been made to the property at 742 Maple Drive. Violation: non-conforming roof materials. Specifics: installation of unauthorized bright blue synthetic covering. Bylaw reference: Section 4.2.1, Aesthetic Continuity, and Section 5.3, Prohibited Colors. While we understand that repairs may be necessary, all exterior materials must be earth-toned and blend harmoniously with the neighborhood aesthetic: slate gray, autumn brown, or forest green. The use of electric blue is strictly prohibited. Fine assessment: $500, $100. Remediation required: immediate removal of unapproved material within 24 hours. I stared at the paper. My hands started to shake. It wasn't the money. Well, it was the money. $500 was a lot. But it was the audacity. Immediate removal? It was forecasted to rain for the next 3 days. She fined us, I said, my voice flat. She actually fined us. Sarah looked over my shoulder. She wants us to take the tarp off? It's raining right now. She wants us to have a gray tarp, I said, reading the fine print. She wants me to go back up on the roof in the rain, rip off the thing keeping our house dry, and replace it with a designer tarp that doesn't exist. You're going to the meeting tonight, Sarah said. It wasn't a suggestion. Oh, I'm going to the meeting, I said, grabbing my keys. And I'm bringing the bucket of roof water. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a sterile building that smelled of floor wax and repressed rage. There were about 30 people there, mostly the regulars, the retirees with nothing to do, the neighborhood busybodies, and a few poor souls who were trying to get permission to build a shed or paint their front door a slightly different shade of beige. At the front of the room, sitting behind a long folding table like a tribunal of minor deities, sat the board. And in the center, on a chair slightly higher than the others, was Patricia. I waded through 45 minutes of discussion about trash can placement and the scourge of basketball hoops being left in driveways. Finally, Patricia looked at her list. New business, she announced. Mr. David Miller, you wish to appeal a citation? I stood up. I didn't have the bucket of water. Sarah had talked me out of it. But I had photos. I walked to the front. Hi, everyone, I said, turning to the room. Most of you know me. I'm Dave. I live on Maple. 2 nights ago, a tree branch tried to assassinate my attic. A few people nodded sympathetically. I put a tarp on it, I continued, because I like living indoors without an umbrella. 2 days later, I get a $500 fine because the tarp is blue. I slammed the letter onto the table in front of Patricia. Patricia, this is insane, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's an emergency repair. You can't fine someone for stopping a leak. Patricia didn't blink. She adjusted her glasses. David, we all sympathize with your moisture issues, but rules are what separate civilization from anarchy. If we let you have a blue tarp, then Bob down the street will want a red one. Then someone puts up a neon green fence. Property values plummet. It's a slippery slope. It's a tarp, I shouted, losing my cool. It's not a permanent fixture. It's there until I can get a roofer. And how long will that be? Patricia asked sweetly. I don't know. Everyone is booked. Well, Patricia sighed, looking at her fellow board members. The board has discussed this. We are willing to reduce the fine to $250 if you replace the tarp with an approved color by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow. Otherwise, the fine stands, and daily non-compliance fees of $50 will be added. Where am I supposed to find a slate-gray, heavy-duty tarp in 24 hours? I demanded. My brother-in-law owns Elite Coverings, Patricia said, sliding a business card across the table. They specialize in HOA-compliant temporary structures. I believe they rent tarps for $200 a week. The room went silent. The grift was so open, so naked, it was almost breathtaking. You want me to rent a tarp from your brother-in-law? I said slowly. I am simply offering a solution, David, she smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just cornered a seal. Next item. I walked out of that meeting with a ringing in my ears. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the principle. It was the smugness. It was the absolute, unadulterated power trip. She wanted a war. She wanted to use the rule book to bludgeon me into submission. Fine. I was going to beat her, and I wasn't going to use a hammer. I was going to use paper. The next morning, I called a roofer. Not just any roofer, but Big Mike. Big Mike was a legend in the Tri-County area. He was 6'4", shaped like a vending machine, and had hands that looked like catcher's mitts. He was honest, he was expensive, and he didn't take nonsense from anyone. He pulled up in his truck, looked at the blue tarp, and nodded. Nice tarp, he rumbled. Good coverage. Did you use the furring strips? I did, I said. Good man. Kept the wind from ripping it. Okay, let's look at the damage. Mike spent 20 minutes on the roof. He came down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and gave me the verdict. It's ugly but fixable. Decking is cracked. Needs new plywood, new underlayment, new shingles. I can fit you in, let's see, 6 weeks out. But I can do it. 6 weeks? I winced. That was 6 weeks of fines. Okay, book it. But Mike, I need a favor. I need you to fill out the HOA work permit application right now. Ugh, Mike groaned. The estates? They're a nightmare, Dave. They want paint samples for the flashing. I know, but if I have an approved permit, they can't fine me for the tarp while I wait for you. We sat at my kitchen table and filled out the form. It was 4 pages long. It asked for the contractor's license, insurance, blood type, and astrological sign. We attached a sample of the shingle, charcoal black, which was the exact same color currently on the roof. I walked the application over to Patricia's house and dropped it in the HOA business box on her porch. I waited. 2 days later, the application came back in the mail. Denied. Reason: shingle sample does not match the architectural harmony of the subdivision. The proposed charcoal black is too aggressive. Please submit a sample for midnight soot. It's the same color, I yelled at the kitchen wall. I held the sample up to the window. It was black. It was just black asphalt. I called Mike. Yeah, they do that, Mike said over the phone. They want you to buy the midnight soot, because that's the brand the local supply house carries. And the supply house gives the HOA a kickback on community referrals. Just buy a bundle of the other stuff. Mike, I'm not buying a whole new roof of different shingles just to please her. Then resubmit. I resubmitted. This time, I labeled the sample Midnight Soot, even though it was still charcoal black. 3 days later. Denied. Reason. Application form was filled out in blue ink. All official HOA documents must be completed in black ink. I stared at the paper. I felt a blood vessel throb in my temple. She's messing with you, Sarah said, reading the rejection. She knows you have the tarp up. She knows the fines are racking up. She's stalling. I checked the fine balance online. $500 initial fine, plus 10 days of $50 daily non-compliance. We were at $1,000. I'm going to go over there, I said, standing up. Dave, no, Sarah warned. If you go over there and yell, she'll call the cops. She did it to the Johnsons when their dog barked at her cat. I'm not going to yell, I lied. I marched across the street. I rang Patricia's doorbell. She opened the door, wearing a floral apron that looked too clean to be used for actual cooking. David, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you rent the tarp? I submitted the permit again, Patricia, I said, holding up the black ink version. It's been 2 weeks. My roof is leaking. I have a contractor ready. I need the approval. Well, the architectural committee meets on the 1st and 3rd Tuesdays, she said, leaning against the doorframe. You missed the cutoff for yesterday's meeting. We'll review it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Patricia, that's another $700 in fines. Then you should have used black ink the first time, she smiled. A cold, reptilian smile. Ignorance of the rules is not an exemption, David. Perhaps if you used the recommended service providers, things would move smoother. Elite Coverings has a fast-track agreement with us. There it was, the squeeze. Pay her brother-in-law, or bleed out slowly. I'm not hiring your brother-in-law, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Then enjoy the fines, she said, and closed the door in my face. I stood there on her porch, staring at the wood grain of her door. I could hear the faint sound of smooth jazz playing inside. I walked back to my house. I didn't storm. I didn't kick anything. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who has just had a revelation. Well? Sarah asked when I came in. Did you fix it? No, I said. I went to the fridge and grabbed a beer. But I realized something. She's fighting a battle of aesthetics. She cares about how things look. She cares about the rules. So I need to stop trying to comply with the HOA rules, I said, cracking the beer. I need to find a set of rules that are bigger than hers. I went to my study and opened my laptop. I didn't look at the HOA bylaws. I didn't look at the neighborhood covenants. I went to the city government website. I pulled up the municipal building code. I pulled up the federal OSHA regulations. I pulled up the state property rights statutes. I spent the entire weekend reading. I drank 3 pots of coffee. I learned more about zoning laws than any human being should ever know. My eyes burned. My brain felt like it was melting. And then, at 3:00 a.m. on Sunday, I found it. It was buried in subsection 114, B of the Municipal Safety Ordinance, titled Active Construction Sites and Temporary Safety Measures. I read it twice. Then I read it a 3rd time. A slow grin spread across my face. It was the grin of a man who has just found the thermal exhaust port on the Death Star. "Sarah!" I yelled, running into the bedroom. "Wake up! I found the golden loophole!" "Is the roof leaking again?" she mumbled, terrified. "No," I said, shaking the printed pages. but it's about to become a legally protected historical monument of pettiness. The next morning, I took a sick day. I put on my best button-down shirt and drove to City Hall. I didn't go to the permitting desk that handles simple repairs. I went to the desk labeled Major Structural Rehabilitation. The clerk was a guy named Jenkins. He looked like he had been working at that desk since the invention of concrete. He had a gray mustache and eyes that had seen the folly of man. "Help you?" he grunted. "Hi," I said, placing my application on the counter. "I need to pull a permit for a residential roof project, but it's not just a repair. I want to open a permit for a full structural roof assessment and slow-cure timber rehabilitation." Jenkins looked at me over his spectacles. "Slow-cure timber rehabilitation? That ain't a thing, son." "It is if I say I'm doing it," I said. "Look, I have a leak. My HOA is fining me for the tarp. I need a permit that stays open for a long time so I can classify the house as an active construction zone. According to City Ordinance 114.b, an active construction zone is exempt from aesthetic nuisances, including temporary coverings, scaffolding, and safety barriers, provided the permit is active." Jenkins paused. He looked at the paperwork. Then he looked at me. A spark of recognition lit up his eyes. "HOA trouble?" Jenkins asked. "Oakhaven Estates," I said. "Patricia Vance." Jenkins snorted. It was a loud, wet sound. "I know her. She tried to report the city snowplows for being too loud last winter. She called my supervisor 3 times. She's fining me $50 a day for a blue tarp," I said. Jenkins grabbed his stamp. He stamped the paper with a force that shook the counter. "Approved." "Here's how it works," Jenkins said, leaning in, suddenly a co-conspirator. "A standard building permit is good for 6 months. But as long as you show progressive work or pass a partial inspection once every 90 days, I can renew it indefinitely. Do you understand? Indefinitely." "And what constitutes progressive work?" I asked. "Hammer a nail," Jenkins grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "Move a plank. Have a contractor sign an invoice for consultation. As long as the paper trail exists, the site is active. And if the site is active, the tarp is a safety device," I finished. "Exactly. And federal OSHA laws say you can't remove safety devices until the hazard is mitigated. If the HOA tries to touch you, they're interfering with a federally regulated worksite." I could have kissed him. He's paid the $75 fee. I walked out of City Hall with a bright yellow placard encased in plastic. City of Austin. Building permit. Active construction site. Do not remove. I drove home. I didn't park in the driveway. I parked on the street. I walked up to my front window, right next to the front door, and I taped the permit to the glass with heavy-duty duct tape. Then I went to the garage. I found some yellow caution tape left over from Halloween. I strung it across the driveway. I sat on the porch and waited. It took Patricia about 4 hours. She was doing her evening patrol. She saw the caution tape. She saw the permit. She stopped the Lexus so fast the tires chirped. She marched up the driveway. "David, what is this? What is this trash on your lawn?" "Patricia!" I yelled, standing up and holding out a hand. "Stop! Don't cross the line!" She froze. "Excuse me?" "This is an active construction site," I said, pointing to the permit. "Authorized personnel only. You're not wearing a hard hat." "This is ridiculous," she scoffed, stepping over the tape. "Take this down immediately. You are in violation of—" "Patricia," I interrupted, pulling a printed copy of the city ordinance from my back pocket. "According to city code, forcing a homeowner to remove safety barriers or weatherproofing from an active work site is a Class C misdemeanor. It's also a liability issue. If you step on a nail, I get sued. If you distract the site manager, that's me, and I fall, you get sued. She snatched the paper from my hand. She read it. Her face went from pink to a lovely shade of puce. You got a building permit, she hissed. So you're fixing the roof? I am engaging in a slow-cure timber rehabilitation, I said solemnly. It's a very delicate process. It requires the wood to breathe under a protective layer, the tarp, for an extended period. The city approved it. How extended? She demanded. Hard to say, I shrugged. Wood is unpredictable. Could be weeks. Could be years. You cannot keep a blue tarp on your roof for years, David. The bylaws. The city ordinance supersedes the bylaws, Patricia, I said, delivering the kill shot. Federal and city law, top of the food chain. You can fine me all you want, but I'm legally prohibited from taking the tarp down until the permit is closed. And if you try to enforce the fine in court, the judge will ask why you are trying to force me to violate a city safety order. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. She looked at the permit. She looked at the blue tarp fluttering in the breeze. She looked at me. We will see about this, she spat. She turned on her heel and marched back to her car. Watch out for falling debris, I called after her. I sat back down. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had bought myself time. I didn't know yet that I had just started a war that would consume the next 2 years of my life. I didn't know about the police, the safety fence, or the lawsuits. All I knew was that the tarp was staying. And it was beautiful. The first 6 months were a game of chicken. The tarp stayed up. The sun bleached it from nuclear smurf to sad robin's egg, but it held. Every time it rained, I slept like a baby, knowing my attic was dry and Patricia was awake, staring at her ceiling, seething. I received fines in the mail every single week. Week 1, $350, accumulated. Week 4, $1,400. Month 3, $4,500. I didn't pay a dime. Instead, every time a fine arrived, I sent back a certified letter to the HOA board, per city permit. 421, the property is currently under active construction. The presence of temporary weatherproofing is required by law. Please void the attached invoice as it demands illegal action, removal of safety equipment. Regards, Dave. I had a stack of return receipts on my desk 3 inches thick. To keep the permit active, I had to follow Jenkins' advice. I had to show activity every 90 days. On day 89, I called Big Mike. Mike, it's time, I said. You're crazy, Dave, Mike laughed. But I love it. I'll be there in an hour. Mike arrived in his work truck. He put on a high-visibility vest and a hard hat. He set up a ladder. He climbed up to the roof with a single shingle and a hammer. He sat on the roof ridge. He ate a sandwich. He waved at Patricia's house. Then, with great ceremony, he hammered 1 nail into a piece of scrap wood I had nailed near the chimney. Bang, bang, bang. He climbed down. He wrote me an invoice. Invoice MUM402. Service. Structural load testing and incremental shingle adjustment. Cost, $5,000. I paid him. I took a photo of the invoice. I emailed it to the city clerk. Jenkins emailed back a thumbs-up emoji. The permit renewed for another 90 days. Patricia, however, was not idle. She realized she couldn't beat me with fines alone. She needed to escalate. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the police car rolled up. I was working in the garage, reorganizing my fishing tackle, which counts as site management if you stretch the definition. Officer Miller, a guy I recognized from the local gym, walked up the driveway. He looked annoyed. "Hey, Dave," Miller said, hitching up his belt. "Hey, Officer Miller, what brings you to the job site?" I asked, grinning. "We got a call," Miller sighed, checking his notebook. "Anonymous report of a squatter den and potential illicit chemical manufacturing at this address. The caller mentioned hazardous materials covering the roof to hide ventilation." "She called me a meth lab," I said flatly. "Patricia called you and said I'm cooking meth because of the tarp." "She didn't use her name," Miller said, trying to be professional. "But, yeah, she said the blue tarp is a signal to dealers." I laughed so hard I almost choked. "Come on in, Miller. I'll show you the lab." I walked him through the house. It was spotless. Sarah had just vacuumed. I took him to the attic. I showed him the bucket, now dry, and the permit taped to the rafters. "Here's the deal," I said, showing him the paperwork. "It's an active construction permit. City code. I'm waiting on specialized timber curing." Miller looked at the permit. He looked at the tarp. He looked at me. He started to chuckle. "You're loopholing the HOA, aren't you?" "I am exercising my rights as a builder," I corrected. "Dave, this is hilarious," Miller said. "But honestly, she's calling dispatch every other day. The tarp is loose. The tarp is flapping. The tarp is reflecting sunlight into her eyes. We can't keep coming out here." "Then tell her to stop filing false reports," I said. "That's a crime, isn't it?" "It is." Miller nodded. He walked back outside. Patricia was watering her petunias, pretending not to watch. Miller walked over to her. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw Patricia stiffen. She dropped the hose. She pointed at my house. Miller shook his head, tapped his badge, and pointed back at her house. Patricia stormed inside. Miller gave me a wave and drove off. I thought that was a victory. But I underestimated the depths of bureaucratic evil. 2 weeks later, I got a notice. Not a fine. A notice of a special bylaw amendment vote. Proposed amendment to Section 4.2. Any construction or repair project that exceeds 30 days in duration requires a $5,000 performance bond and must be screened from public view by a professional opaque barrier. She was changing the laws to catch me. If this passed, I'd have to put up a giant screen around my roof, which would cost thousands, or pay a bond I'd never get back. "She's changing the rules of the game," Sarah said, reading the flyer. "She's going to bankrupt us." "Screened from public view," I mumbled, reading the text. "She wants a barrier." "Dave, just fix the roof," Sarah pleaded. "It's been 8 months." "No," I said, a dark idea forming in my mind. "If I fix it now, she wins. I need to comply. She wants a barrier? I'll give her a barrier." I went back to the OSHA manual. Section 1926-502. Warning line systems. When working on low-slope roofs, a warning line, a barrier, must be erected around all sides of the roof work area. But there was more. Section 1926-200. Accident prevention signs and tags. Danger signs shall be used where an immediate hazard exists. I went to the hardware store. I didn't buy a nice beige privacy screen. I bought 3 rolls of construction safety fencing. You know the kind. It's a mesh plastic. It is the color of a radioactive pumpkin. It is orange, violently orange. I also bought signs. Danger. Hard hat area. Keep out. Open trench. There was no trench, but who knows? I spent the Saturday afternoon installing it. I wrapped the entire perimeter of my front lawn in the orange plastic fencing. I used metal T-posts. It looked like a quarantine zone for a zombie outbreak. I hung the signs every 10 feet. Danger. Falling debris. Authorized personnel only. When I finished, My house looked like a crime scene wrapped in a traffic cone. I waited. Patricia didn't drive by. She walked over. She was vibrating. She was actually shaking with rage. "David!" she shrieked. It was the first time she had raised her voice. "What is this?" I was ready. I was wearing a yellow hard hat and a reflective vest. I held a clipboard. "Ma'am, please step back," I barked, using my best contractor voice. "You are unauthorized to be this close to the perimeter." "Take this down," she screamed, pointing at the orange mesh. "It is an eyesore. It is disgusting." "It is a mandatory safety barrier," I yelled back. "You tried to pass a bylaw requiring a barrier for ongoing projects. Well, here it is. OSHA compliant. High visibility to prevent accidents." "I meant a beige screen." "OSHA doesn't care about beige, Patricia. OSHA cares about visibility. Orange is the safest color. I am protecting the children." "I will sue you," she screamed. "I will foreclose on this house." "Get off my job site," I countered. She ran back to her house. The war had shifted. It wasn't about the roof anymore. It was about dominance. The orange fence stayed. The blue tarp stayed. And then the lawsuit arrived. The envelope wasn't cream-colored this time. It was manila, thick, and delivered by a process server named Gary, who looked like he'd rather be fishing. "David Miller?" he asked, standing on my porch, carefully avoiding eye contact with the orange safety fencing that now encircled my lawn like a quarantine zone. "That's me," I said. "You've been served." He shoved the packet into my chest and walked away fast. I stood there in the doorway, the heavy thud of the paper hitting my hands echoing the thud of the water that had started this whole mess 9 months ago. I opened it. Superior Court of the State of Texas, Plaintiff. Oak Haven Estates. Homeowners Association Defendant. David Miller. Complaint for judicial foreclosure and damages. I flipped through the pages. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. They weren't just suing me for the fines. They were suing me for diminution of community value, mental anguish caused to the board, and breach of covenant. The total amount demanded, $25,450, plus legal fees. And they were asking the court for an order to seize my home, sell it at auction to satisfy the debt, and evict me. "Dave?" Sarah's voice was small behind me. She was holding a laundry basket. "Is that what I think it is?" "They're suing us," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. It was the calm of a man who realizes the bar fight has just turned into a duel. "They want the house." Sarah dropped the basket. "We have to take the tarp down. Dave, we have to stop. It's not funny anymore." "It stopped being funny when she fined me for saving our drywall," I said, turning to her. "If we fold now, we pay the 25 grand. We admit guilt. They win. Patricia wins. And I will not let that woman own my house." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, tears welling in her eyes. "We call Steve." Steve was my college roommate. He was also a lawyer. He wasn't a fancy corporate lawyer in a high-rise. Steve was a strip mall shark. His office was next to a nail salon and a vape shop. He specialized in traffic tickets, bitter divorces, and fighting insurance companies. He thrived in the mud. I sat in his office the next day, dumping the pile of fines, the permit, the invoices from Big Mike, and the lawsuit onto his desk. Steve picked up a photo of my house. The blue tarp, the orange fence, the danger signs. He stared at it for a long time, then he started to laugh. It was a wheezing, hacking laugh. "Dave," he wiped a tear from his eye. "This is the ugliest thing I have ever seen. It's magnificent. Can they take my house, Steve? Steve stopped laughing. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. In Texas? Yes. HOAs have foreclosure power. It's their nuclear option. If the fines are legitimate and the lien is perfected, they can put you on the curb. But the fines aren't legitimate, I insisted. I have a city permit. I'm an active construction site. Steve picked up the permit copy. He read the slow cure timber rehabilitation clause. He looked at the invoice for the single nail hammered by Big Mike. You legally classified your roof as a long-term timber curing project? Steve asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, City Ordinance 114.B. Steve grinned. It was a predatory grin. Okay, here's the strategy. We don't just defend. We counter-sue. We drag this out. We make them bleed legal fees. And we demand discovery. I want to see every email Patricia has sent about you. I want to see the bid process for the roofing recommendations. Why? Because, Steve said, tapping the photo of Patricia. People like this get sloppy. She's pushing too hard. She's steered you to her brother-in-law 3 times in writing. That's not just annoying, Dave. That's potentially fraud. The next 6 months were a blur of depositions and paperwork. The orange fence remained. The blue tarp remained. But now the neighborhood was divided. It was a civil war. Team Patricia, mostly the elderly board members and people who ironed their socks, saw me as a scourge, a blight on the community. Team Dave, everyone under 40, the guy with the loud motorcycle, and oddly, the mailman, saw me as a folk hero. I started finding things on my porch. A 6-pack of beer, a Don't Tread on Me flag, a fruit basket with a note that said, Fight the Power, the Johnsons at 744. Patricia, meanwhile, was unraveling. During her deposition, she refused to look at me. She sat stiffly, answering Steve's questions with short, clipped sentences. Mrs. Vance, Steve asked, did you or did you not personally photograph the defendant's home at 7:00 a.m. on a Sunday? I was documenting a violation, she sniffed. And is it true that you hold a financial interest in Elite Coverings, the company you demanded Mr. Miller use? I demanded nothing. I merely suggested a reputable vendor. My husband's brother owns it. I have no stake. We'll see, Steve muttered. The trial date was set for a humid Tuesday in August. It had been nearly 2 years since the first drop of water hit my face. My roof was still blue. My lawn was still orange. The courtroom was freezing. Judge Henderson sat on the bench. He looked like a man who had heard every stupid neighbor dispute in the history of jurisprudence and was tired of all of them. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy in a suit that cost more than my car, stood up. He painted a picture of me as an anarchist, a man who reveled in chaos, a man who willfully destroyed the sanctity of Oak Haven Estates. Your Honor, he intoned, pointing an accusatory finger at me. Mr. Miller has held the community hostage for 22 months. He has turned a simple repair into a spectacle. He mocks the very concept of property value. We ask for the full judgment and the right to foreclose. Then it was Steve's turn. Steve didn't wear a fancy suit. He wore a rumpled gray jacket. He walked up to the podium and placed a single piece of paper on it. The city permit. Your Honor, Steve said, my client is a law-abiding citizen. He is a man who respects safety. He is a man who follows the strict, often burdensome regulations of the city of Austin. Steve picked up the permit. This is a valid, active building permit, Steve continued. It authorizes a slow-cure timber rehabilitation. Now, I'm not a carpenter, and neither is Mrs. Vance, but the city building department, the highest authority on structural safety, has deemed this project active. They have inspected the paperwork. They have renewed it every 90 days. Steve turned to the jury. Well, the judge, it was a bench trial. The HOA demands Mr. Miller remove the tarp, but if he does, he violates the conditions of his city permit. He would be creating an unsafe work environment. The HOA is asking this court to order Mr. Miller to break the law, to violate OSHA standards, to endanger the public. Judge Henderson leaned forward. Counsel, are you telling me that blue tarp is a federally mandated safety device? As long as the permit is open, Your Honor. Yes, it is weatherproofing for an active structural assessment. And the orange fence? The judge asked, peering over his glasses. OSHA Regulation 1926-502, Steve recited from memory. Warning line systems for roof work. Mr. Miller is simply being a prudent site manager. The HOA lawyer jumped up. Objection! This is a sham. There is no construction. He hammers one nail every 3 months just to keep the paper alive. Ah, Steve smiled. Let's look at the evidence. He projected a photo onto the court screen. It was Big Mike, up on my roof, wearing a hard hat, examining a piece of wood. This is Michael Kowalski, a licensed master roofer, Steve said. He is conducting a load-bearing test. He is a professional. Are we to question the judgment of a master roofer? Then came the cross-examination of Patricia. Steve called her to the stand. She walked up like she was ascending a throne. Mrs. Vance, Steve said, leaning on the railing. You fined Mr. Miller for the color of his tarp, correct? It was non-conforming, she said tightly. And you fined him for the orange fence? It is hideous. Mrs. Vance, are you aware that the City Ordinance 114.b explicitly states that no private entity may impede, restrict, or penalize the installation of safety barriers on a permitted construction site? The bylaws do not supersede the law, Mrs. Vance, Steve snapped. His voice lost its casual tone. It became hard. Now, let's talk about elite coverings. Patricia paled. Steve held up a bank statement. We had found it in Discovery. It was a joint account held by Patricia and her husband. Can you explain these monthly deposits from Elite Coverings LLC? Steve asked. They seem to coincide perfectly with the dates you ordered homeowners to use that specific company. There are 12 deposits here, totaling $15,000. The courtroom went silent. The air was sucked out of the room. That is a consulting fee, Patricia stammered. My husband consults. Does he consult on how to rip off neighbors? Steve asked. Objection! The HOA lawyer screamed. Withdrawn, Steve smiled. No further questions. Judge Henderson didn't need a long deliberation. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at Patricia, who was now sweating through her silk blouse. He looked at me. Mr. Miller, the judge said, I have to be honest. You are a pain in the neck. My heart stopped. However, the judge continued, you are a legally compliant pain in the neck. The court finds that the city building permit is valid. The HOA has no authority to override municipal safety ordinances or building codes. The fines levied regarding the tarp and the safety fence are void ab initio, invalid from the start. I let out a breath I had been holding for 2 years. Furthermore, the judge said, his eyes narrowing at Patricia, the court is deeply controlled by the evidence of financial impropriety regarding the plaintiff's relationship with vendors. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into fraud and embezzlement. And the foreclosure? The HOA lawyer squeaked. Denied with prejudice. The judge slammed his gavel. Case dismissed, and plaintiff is ordered to pay defendant's legal fees. I didn't cheer. I didn't jump up and down. I just looked at Sarah. She was crying, but this time they were happy tears. We walked out of the courthouse into the blinding Texas sun. Steve lit a cigarette. We did it, Steve said. We actually did it. So, I asked, can I take the tarp down now? Technically, Steve laughed. You can keep it up forever. But yeah, you won, Dave. Go fix your roof. The fall of Patricia Vance was swift and brutal. The news of the trial spread through Oak Haven Estates like a virus. The kickback queen, they called her. The emergency board meeting held 3 days later was standing room only. I didn't go. I didn't need to. I heard from the neighbors that Patricia resigned in tears before the vote to remove her could even be tallied. The entire board was dissolved. A new board was elected. A group of younger, more relaxed homeowners who ran on a platform of, unless your house is on fire, we don't care. The district attorney did investigate. Patricia avoided jail time by paying a massive fine and doing community service, but her reputation was incinerated. She put the Lexus up for sale. Then she put the house up for sale. They moved to Florida a month later, but I still had a roof to fix. It was a crisp Saturday in October, exactly 2 years and 14 days since the storm. Big Mike pulled up with his entire crew. This wasn't a consultation. This was the real deal. I stood on the lawn, holding a cup of coffee, watching them set up. The orange fence was gone. I had taken it down the day after the trial, cutting it into small squares and mailing them to the HOA office as a donation. Mike climbed the ladder. He hooked his hammer onto the edge of the blue tarp, the faded, tattered, heroic blue tarp that had weathered storms, sun, and legal battles. You ready, Dave? Mike yelled down. Do it, I shouted. With a rip that sounded like a giant zipper, Mike tore the tarp free. It fluttered down to the grass, a slain dragon. My roof, naked and rotting, was finally exposed to the sun. They worked for 3 days. The sound of nail guns was music to my ears. They stripped the old wood. They replaced the decking. They waterproofed the valleys. On the final day, it was time for the shingles. Big Mike came down the ladder. All right, boss. We got the standard charcoal black in the truck. Same as everyone else. I looked across the street. Patricia's house was empty, a for sale sign in the yard. But the house next to it belonged to the Andersons, nice people who had supported me. And down the street were the Johnsons. I thought about the architectural harmony. I thought about the beige, the gray, the conformity. Mike, I said, do you remember that custom order we talked about? The one you said was technically a composite slate, but looked distinct? Mike grinned. You mean the Azure Slate blend? That's the one. Dave, it's pretty blue. It's dark blue, classy blue, but it is definitely blue. Is it on the prohibited materials list? I asked. No. Mike checked his clipboard. The new board threw out the color restrictions list last week. Said it was oppressive. Right now, the only rule is no neon. Then let's do it, I said. It took them all afternoon. When they finished, the sun was setting. I stood in the driveway with Sarah. The roof wasn't the screaming electric blue of the tarp. It was a deep, rich, oceanic blue. It looked like crushed velvet against the twilight sky. It was unique. It was bold. It was beautiful. And it was permanent. Neighbors started coming out, not to complain, but to look. It actually looks really good, Mr. Johnson said, walking over with a beer. Matches the shutters. It's got character, someone else said. I put my arm around Sarah. We had spent 2 years living under a plastic sheet. We had been sued. We had been threatened. We had almost lost everything. But we had won. You know, Sarah said, resting her head on my shoulder, I think I'm going to miss the orange fence. It really made the grass look greener. Don't push it, I laughed. I took a sip of my coffee, looking up at my blue roof, shining under the first stars of the evening. Somewhere in Florida, Patricia Vance was probably measuring someone's grass with a ruler. But here, in Oak Haven Estates, the tyranny was over. Hey, I said to the gathered neighbors. Who wants to see the permit? I think I'm going to frame it and hang it on the front door. Laughter erupted. The streetlights flickered on. The neighborhood was safe, the water stayed outside, and I was finally, blissfully, just a guy with a fixed roof. But I kept the hard hat. You never know when you might need to open a new permit.